вторые сутки пытаюсь заправиться бензином.
Бензина нет, ситуация повторяется.
Это обсейвы. Работают 4 колонки. 2,5 часа. Очередь, еле достояли.
Russia pumps more oil than almost anyone on the planet, but right now, its citizens are begging for a few liters. Ukrainian drones have been systematically slaughtering Russia's refineries, and the second wave of shortages is now crushing at least 10 regions. In Moscow, gas stations are going dark. In the Far East, drivers are trading punches over empty pumps. And the humiliation doesn't stop there. A tanker loaded with Moroccan gasoline has been sitting off the coast of Murmansk for weeks because Russia's own regulators and oil companies can't agree on a price. The fuel is sitting there, within arm's reach, while the country burns through its last drops. The world's largest energy exporter is importing fuel it can't even distribute. That's not a supply crisis, that's a national embarrassment. By August 16th, gasoline was available at only 28.1% of Russian gas stations nationwide, a sharp drop from 41% just 1 week earlier. That single number captures how fast this second wave has accelerated, and it's forcing Russia's own regulators into overdrive trying to contain the fallout. Russia's Federal Anti-Monopoly Service has already opened 41 cases and issued 68 warnings against oil companies and independent gas stations. Nearly 3 times as many cases as the agency opened during the entire first 5 months of the year combined. Trading activity confirms the panic is real too. Gasoline sales on the St. Petersburg International Mercantile Exchange fell by an average of 20% since the start of August compared to the second half of July. This second wave didn't come out of nowhere either. It followed fresh Ukrainian drone strikes on oil refineries in late July and early August, breaking a brief stabilization period that had only just started to take hold before collapsing again within days. Even the country's capital isn't spared.
К сожалению, в Москве закончился бензин. Либо огромная очередь, либо вообще едешь и заправки везде прочерки.
In the Moscow region, gasoline has completely vanished from certain filling stations, while diesel remains available almost everywhere, creating a strange two-tier shortage where one fuel type disappears and the other doesn't.
Ну что ж, бензина нет как в баке его нет, так и на заправках. Только дизель, только дизель. Я вам скажу, что эта волна вторая будет гораздо сложнее и хуже первой.
Russia's own government finally acknowledged the scale of it at a special energy sector meeting on August 14th, admitting plainly that the situation with fuel supplies remains difficult, and naming 10 specific problem regions by name. Those newly affected regions include Tver, Zabaikalsky, Primorsky, Tuva, and Khakassia, meaning the crisis has now spread well beyond the areas hit earlier this summer and reached deep into Siberia and Russia's Far East. What makes this second wave especially frustrating for Russian officials is that it's no longer purely about refinery damage. Despite considerable gasoline production, volumes still coming out of the country's remaining refineries. Fuel simply cannot reach certain regions because of logistics and delivery failures layered on top of the original strike damage. Russia's response to that gap has gotten increasingly improvised. The country has leaned harder into what are called gray refining schemes, informal, lower standard processing methods used to squeeze out extra fuel and compensate for the refinery capacity that's simply gone. On July 30th, Russia extended its export ban on gasoline and diesel for another 6 months, locking domestic supply inside the country rather than risk losing more of it to foreign buyers while shortages persist at home. Moscow has also started redirecting gasoline that was originally meant for Central Asian countries, pulling it through Belarus instead to plug domestic gaps. But even record volumes moving through that channel haven't been enough to close the deficit. On top of that, Russia was forced to import gasoline from Morocco, adding to fuel already arriving from South Korea, Japan, and India. A genuinely desperate scramble across the globe just to keep pumps running at home. The economic strain runs even deeper than the pumps themselves. Shadow employment inside Russia has climbed to 41%, meaning 74.6 million people are working, while only 44.1 million actually appear on official payrolls between January and May 2026. A gap threatening the Kremlin with a massive shortfall in tax revenue it desperately needs. Part of that shift comes down to simple math for employers. Keeping a full-time worker on the books now costs Russian businesses 43% more than the salary itself, pushing companies towards self-employed contractor arrangements that pay just 6% in professional income tax instead of over 30% for formal employment. Alongside the fuel and tax troubles, Russia has been tightening its grip on daily life in other ways too. In July 2026, only about a third of mobile internet sessions inside the country happened without restrictions, as authorities keep expanding whitelisted internet access while blocking foreign VPNs and messaging apps. Russia's own Ministry of Transport is now drafting an order that would allow real-time tracking of every citizen's movement across every mode of long-distance transport, both inside the country and internationally. Officially justified as an anti-terrorism measure, but functioning as a dramatic expansion of civilian surveillance. Russia is separately introducing mandatory SIM card to phone hardware linkage too, specifically designed to prevent anonymous communication. And while Moscow is tightening surveillance inside the country, its fuel crisis is creating an entirely different problem at the ports. As cited by United 24 Media, Russia has imported 30,000 metric tons, close to 41 million liters of AI-92 gasoline from Morocco. It's been sitting off Murmansk for more than 2 weeks now, unloaded but going nowhere, because the Moroccan seller is demanding up to 150,000 rubles per ton. While Russian regulators insist the fuel be sold at the domestic exchange price of just 77,620 rubles per ton, nearly half. The St. Petersburg Exchange even opened new trading instruments specifically for this AI-92 shipment on July 29th, and trading still hasn't started, because the fuel remains stuck offshore while both sides refuse to budge. What started back in May 2026 as a fuel problem tied mainly to refinery damage has now become something bigger. At this point, the Kremlin's own toolkit looks nearly empty. Export bans cost the government revenue, lowering fuel quality risks, damaging equipment, printing money accelerates inflation, and imports simply aren't large enough to cover the gap, leaving Russia stuck in what looks like an unresolvable policy trap. To understand exactly why fuel keeps disappearing across such a massive stretch of the country, you have to look at exactly where Ukraine has been striking. And the list reads like a map of Russia's entire refining backbone. The Omsk oil refinery, Russia's largest, sitting more than 2,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border deep in Siberia, was struck using FP-1 long-range drone in early July, forcing a complete processing halt and sending immediate shockwaves through the domestic fuel market. The Norsy refinery in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia's second largest gasoline producer and fourth largest overall, got hit on July 2nd for the second time, with the attack heavily damaging a processing unit responsible for 53% of the entire refinery's capacity. That detail matters because Ukraine isn't just hitting storage tanks that Russia can patch up quickly. Drones are deliberately targeting primary distillation units, the specialized towers that actually convert crude oil into usable fuel, components that are far harder to repair, because those Western sanctions block Russia from simply buying replacement parts. Damage to these distillation units doesn't function like a temporary shutdown. It functions as permanent capacity loss. The Slavneft Yanos refinery in Yaroslavl was hit in early August, triggering visible public panic as citizens started queuing at gas stations across the surrounding region almost immediately. Just days later, the Tanaco refinery in Nizhnekamsk, Dagestan, a facility capable of refining up to 99% of its crude directly into consumer fuel, took a heavy hit on August 10th, sparking severe fires, killing at least 13 people and knocking major processing units completely offline. The Bashneft Novoil refinery and the nearby Ufa pumping station in Bashkortostan got struck twice, once in July and again on August 6th. with at least 8 drones targeting the pumping station specifically, a facility that feeds fuel into pipelines stretching across central and eastern Russia. Further east, the Tyumen refinery in western Siberia, processing roughly 6 million tons of crude every year, was struck on July 25th and completely halted operations after a massive fire tore through the facility. Even more remote refineries haven't escaped either. The Orsk Nefteorgsyntheze refinery in Orsk-Orenburg was struck on August 10th from more than 1,900 kilometers away, while being the primary fuel supplier for the entire Orenburg region. As Ukraine has spread these strikes across such a wide geographic footprint, from Yaroslavl in the north down to Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, and out to Siberia in the far east, Russia has lost the ability to simply reroute supply from one unaffected region to cover another, since virtually no region has been left fully untouched. Each new wave of strikes lands on refineries already damaged or mid-repair from the last one, creating a compounding, ratcheting decline in Russia's total refining capacity that shows no sign of leveling off. Now, this is where Russia's fuel crisis takes an even more serious turn. Before we reveal what happened next, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to The Frontline Show. We are the only channel tracking every new blow hitting Russia's war machine. Trust us, you do not want to miss what comes next. The frustration boiling over at Russian gas pumps has stopped staying quiet, and Moscow itself saw it firsthand. On August 14th, actual fights broke out between drivers stuck in hours-long fuel queues, with witnesses describing motorists trying to cut in line as tempers finally snapped after hours of waiting under the summer sun. That anger wasn't confined to the capital either. Along the Yaroslavl highway running between Sergiyev, Posad, and Moscow, several stations shut their gates entirely. Others switched to selling only diesel, and the handful still selling gasoline started charging inflated prices to anyone desperate enough to pay.
Я сейчас в таком шоке просто. Главное, еду, снимаю то, что на заправках нет бензина. Проезжаю заправку «Газпром». Смотрю, бензин есть. 95-й бензин 140 рублей. 140 рублей. 2 дня назад он стоил 71 рубль.
Orenburg and Orsk got hit the hardest of all. Emergency restrictions imposed on August 12th produced queues stretching anywhere from 15 minutes to 2.5 hours, with Lukoil, Brent Fuller, and most Bashneft stations either closing entirely or stocking diesel only. Orenburg introduced the most aggressive rationing regime seen anywhere in a major Russian region so far, combining a 30-liter cap per vehicle with an odd-even license plate rotation system, meaning drivers could only refuel on specific days depending on their plate number. The nearby town of Buguruslan in Orenburg Oblast went even further, adopting a split-schedule system that reserves specific time windows exclusively for emergency and special-purpose vehicles before opening the pumps to ordinary drivers at all.
Какая фигня. Бензин есть, но его нельзя залить просто людям. Только у кого есть какие-то специальные карты, типа Министерства обороны, менты там и все такое прочее.
That same rationing pattern shows up across the entire north. In Kirovsk, in the Murmansk region, only one of 2 Rosneft stations has any gasoline at all, distributed on a scheduled rationing basis of 30 liters per person, while the second station has stocked nothing but diesel for a full week. In the nearby Apatity region, the Gazprom station is completely dry, Lukoil has some supply left, and Rosneft is running roughly 50/50 with its own schedule-based restrictions. Arkhangelsk had gasoline at just 3 petrol stations one recent Sunday, each capping sales between 30 and 60 liters per customer, with queues persisting region-wide. And as the shortages spread, the anger among ordinary Russians is no longer just about expensive gasoline. It is about the feeling that a country built around vast energy reserves is somehow struggling to keep its own cars, trucks, and businesses running.
Даже подумать не могла, что мы в нашем современном мире, в этом цивилизованном обществе, в этом технологичном прогрессе можем столкнуться с такой проблемой, как нехватка, отсутствие бензина. А что следующее? Нехватка хлеба, отсутствие хлеба или что?
Ordinary Russians have started adapting in ways that reveal just how deep this insecurity runs. Hybrid vehicle registrations in St. Petersburg jumped 143% in the first 7 months of 2026. with hybrids now making up 11.5% of the city's total car sales, more than double the 5% share they held before. That's not a fashion trend, that's people quietly hedging against a fuel supply they no longer trust. This marks Russia's second consecutive wave of regional crises too. The first one peaked in July, briefly steadied at the end of the month, then broke apart again within days once new drone strikes hit in late July and early August. Officials keep repeating the same uncomfortable admission that despite considerable fuel production still happening inside the country, they simply cannot physically move it to where people need it. Russia's domestic energy market is now squeezed from 3 directions at once: ongoing refinery strikes, a seasonal summer demand spike, and export restrictions that limit how much revenue the government can pull in to pay for emergency imports. At least 10 regions have now formally acknowledged this second wave, and the timing could not be worse for the Kremlin politically, landing right in the middle of campaigning for the State Duma elections scheduled for September 18th through 20th, meaning voters across the hardest-hit regions are living through the economic cost of this war just weeks before they head to the polls. A very different kind of crisis has been unfolding in Dagestan, one that has almost nothing to do with fuel and everything to do with a power grid that's simply falling apart. Residents of the regional capital, Makhachkala, have endured daily power outages lasting several hours for more than a month straight, with electricity on Akhmat Kadyrov Street cut from morning until noon, then again late into the night. People there stopped waiting patiently a while ago. On August 6th, residents of Kadyrov Street blocked road traffic outright in protest over the endless outages, and power came back on almost immediately afterward. Only for roughly 8,000 residents across Makhachkala to lose electricity again the very next day. 6 days later, on August 12th, residents in the new city neighborhood gathered on Kamayeva Street demanding power be restored, and authorities framed the eventual fix as an accident rather than acknowledging any deeper problem. Then, on August 13th, residents of Irchi Kazaka Street staged the third road blockade in a single week after losing power completely for 3 consecutive days straight. The human toll behind those blockades is honestly kind of brutal to hear described plainly. Residents said it became impossible to cook food or wash clothes, elevators stopped working entirely, trapping people inside for hours at a stretch, and food spoiled by the refrigerator load across entire buildings. When residents complained after an outage back on July 26th, city officials simply urged people not to use high-powered electrical appliances, an answer that reportedly made the anger worse rather than calming anyone down. A clear pattern has emerged from all of this too. Protest works, at least temporarily. Every single road blockade has been followed by power getting restored shortly after, which tells you exactly how residents have learned to get any response from authorities at all. Notably, the August 6th protest on Kadyrov Street was the very first public electricity protest recorded in Makhachkala all year. And many residents reportedly stay away from protesting altogether simply out of fear of what security forces might do to them if they show up. Women have ended up leading a disproportionate share of these demonstrations too, largely because men are seen as more likely to be detained, a dynamic shaped entirely by fear of state repression rather than any organic division of labor. Even Russia's own Ministry of Internal Affairs for the North Caucasus Federal District has acknowledged the situation, with Regional Police Chief Sergei Bachurin stating plainly that housing and utility failures are a primary driver behind rising protest activity across Dagestan. While Dagestan fights over electricity, a much bigger crisis has quietly hit one of Russia's most valuable exports, and this one reaches far beyond its own borders, as the fuel crisis is now colliding with Russia's grain trade too. Ukrainian strikes have crippled more than 90% of Russia's grain export capacity in the Azov Black Sea basin, forcing planners to explore alternative routes as infrastructure damage compounds an already serious maritime blockade. Then came the critical blow. All 3 of Novorossiysk's primary grain terminals, NKHP, NZT, and KSK, suspended operations within days of one another. Those 3 Novorossiysk terminals alone normally handle roughly 25 million metric tons of Russian grain exports every year, And their simultaneous shutdown wiped an estimated 5 million metric tons of wheat straight off the global market overnight. The Taman grain terminal halted operations in late July too, and with navigation across the entire Sea of Azov suspended since July, a corridor responsible for another 25% of Russia's agricultural exports has effectively frozen solid. That leaves Tuops, Russia's smallest deep-water grain terminal, as the only port left operating anywhere in the entire Azov Black Sea region, according to Savicon Managing Director Andrei Sizov. The scale of the collapse becomes obvious once you look at the calendar. Total grain exports for August 2026 are projected at just 3 to 3.4 million metric tons, the lowest August figure recorded since 2016, a genuinely catastrophic drop during what's normally Russia's busiest export season of the entire year. That's especially painful given the Azov Black Sea basin handled 88% of all Russian maritime grain shipments last season alone, 46.3 million tons in total, including 29 million tons through Black Sea terminals specifically. Grain exports normally bring roughly $15 billion into the Russian economy every year, foreign currency revenue Russia badly needs right now to help fund the war. And that entire pipeline is currently choked off at the worst possible moment. What makes this even more painful is the timing. Russia actually pulled in a near-record harvest this year, close to 140 million tons. But with ports shut down and exporters no longer buying, storage facilities across the country are filling up daily with grain that simply has nowhere to go. That glut is crushing prices for the farmers who grew it. Fourth-class wheat is now selling around 12,000 rubles, about $142 per ton, down from 15,000 rubles just a year earlier. Russian Grain Union President Arkady Zlochevsky called it a catastrophic level of loss for producers, and the damage isn't limited to grain prices alone either. Wholesale diesel prices have spiked 43% since the start of 2026, slowing down combine harvesters and transport trucks across Krasnodar, Rostov, and Stavropol right during the peak harvest window when speed matters most. Small and medium farms are taking the hardest hit of all. Most of them lack the storage capacity or spare cash to buy diesel at these premium prices, which is pushing local grain sales below the actual cost of growing it in the first place, a recipe for widespread bankruptcies across Russia's farming heartland. Zlochevsky issued an even darker warning looking ahead, saying that without sufficient financing, the winter sowing campaign will fail entirely. And this crisis could damage next year's harvest before a single seed even goes into the ground. Sizov backed that grim outlook up too, stating plainly that Russia cannot simply force more grain through an export pipeline already running at the absolute limit of its capacity, ruling out any kind of catch-up surge later in the season. The ripple effects of this collapse reach all the way to Africa, and this is where things get genuinely serious for Moscow's own foreign policy. Russia has spent years using preferential wheat contracts and humanitarian grain shipments to maintain political influence over pro-Russian military governments across the Sahel, specifically Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Those juntas rely heavily on Russian food supplies to keep domestic prices stable and maintain their own political legitimacy, especially after cutting ties with Western aid providers entirely. Delays in those grain shipments now risk triggering sharp local food inflation and civil unrest, potentially destabilizing the very governments Moscow has spent years cultivating as strategic allies across Africa. The Telegraph described the unfolding situation bluntly, calling it the start of a wheat war, one that could genuinely trigger unrest in food-insecure Sahel, states that have come to depend on Russian grain just to keep their own populations fed. Fuel shortages and grain delays thousands of kilometers apart might look like two separate stories, but they both trace back to the same source. A war that keeps pulling more and more of Russia's own resources away from where they're actually needed. And that same strain is showing up right on Russia's own doorstep too, which is exactly what we covered in our last video. We showed you how Belarus is quietly building a brand new military brigade barely 40 kilometers from Ukraine's border, right in the same corridor Russian forces once used to try to reach Kyiv, all while Belarus's own economy sits dangerously exposed to whatever happens next inside Russia. If watching Moscow's fuel crisis spiral into a wheat war overseas got your attention, wait until you see what's quietly taking shape inside Russia's own border. Go watch it next, because between empty gas stations, delayed grain ships, and a new brigade forming on Ukraine's border, the full picture of how far this war's pressure is actually spreading becomes impossible to miss. This is the Frontline Show, and this war is moving faster than almost anyone is prepared for. We'll see you in the next one.